Hello, and welcome to Part 2 of Accessibility and Reasonable Accommodations training. In this training, we broadly review how to process a reasonable request, incorporate universal design into activities and programs, as well as some communication skills to engage in the interactive process. This training is developed by Dr. Kenitra Keeney, WSU Extension County Relations Coordinator. WSU is an equal opportunity provider and employer. In this training, you will learn how to process a reasonable accommodation, how to build accessibility into academic activities using universal design, some communication tips when working with the public, how to process a reasonable accommodation request appropriately. First, we need to identify key individuals who are responsible for providing reasonable accommodations when requested. Second, we need to train these individuals on how to complete the request process. Once the request has been made or documented, the interactive process begins. The interactive process, under the American with Disability Act, is the collaborative dialogue between a service provider and a service recipient. The conversation provides a collaborative conversation to determine what reasonable accommodations might be needed and feasible to allow an equally accessible opportunity to participate. Next, the service provider and the individual making the request will discuss accommodations and options which are reasonable and don't cause an undue burden or fundamentally alter the program. As discussed earlier, acceptable accommodations include providing a sign language interpreter, selecting accessible venues, extend time for activities, alter formats such as Braille or large print, or provide personal aids. The reasonable accommodation process should occur in a timely manner. Once the determination has been made, the person requesting the notification should be notified. The denial of accommodations should be based on a clear, documented rationale, and alternatives should be offered. Having a reasonable accommodation process is important, and so is accessibility to the process. Other considerations include making the process easy to access, engage with the person requesting the accommodation as soon as possible, don't assume you have all the answers, don't isolate an individual from programming because of a disability, document the entire process, and receive feedback on overall participant satisfaction. Next, we will talk about how to build accessibility into our programs and activities. Since the Rehabilitation Act was implemented, some progress has been made to provide equally effective access to individuals through the reasonable accommodation process. However, this process is reactive. Universal design is a concept and practice that involves designing environments, products, programs, and services to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. This approach is proactive. Another way to look at this is accessibility often means modifying existing designs to accommodate individuals with disabilities, while universal design goes further. It aims to create inclusive solutions from the outset that serve everyone, including but not limited to people with disabilities. Over the next few slides, we will explore 6 different categories and examples of universal design. Please note, while some of the suggestions have a financial component, there are also some suggestions which can be implemented without additional costs. Educational materials in workshops, handouts, and online content. Use plain language and avoid jargon to help all audiences, including those with lower literacy or cognitive disabilities. Design documents with readable fonts, high contrast, and ample white space. Provide materials in multiple formats such as printed or digital, such as a PDF or Word format, as well as considering audio. Include alt text for images and descriptive captions on visuals or graphs. Use colorblind-friendly color schemes for charts and infographics. Benefit: helps individuals with visual impairments, reading difficulties, aging adults, and English language learners. Number 2, in-person events, such as workshops, demonstrations, and field days. Choose accessible venues with ramps, elevators, and accessible restrooms. Use microphones and sound systems, even for smaller groups. Ensure good lighting and minimal background noise. Offer materials ahead of time and allow questions in multiple formats, such as verbally or via note cards. Arrange seating flexibly so participants with wheelchairs or mobility aids can sit with the group. Benefit: supports individuals with mobility, hearing, sensory, or social interaction needs. Number 3, online programs and webinars. Provide real-time captions and transcripts for recorded sessions. Use platforms compatible with screen readers. Allow participants to type questions instead of speaking. Record sessions and allow for asynchronous viewing with pause and rewind options. Benefit: supports participants with hearing impairments, scheduling conflicts, or anxiety about public speaking. Number 4, program outreach and communication. Use multiple communication methods, for example, phone calls, email, flyers, social media, radio. Ensure websites are mobile-friendly and meet accessibility standards. Translate outreach materials into the most common languages in the community. Benefit: increases engagement among limited English proficient individuals, older adults, rural residents, and people without internet access. Number 5, hands-on demonstrations in activities such as gardening, cooking, or 4-H activities. Use tools with ergonomic handles or adaptive alternatives. Offer visual instructions as well as spoken ones. Label items with text and pictures. Break tasks into simple, clearly explained steps. Benefit: helps youth, people with intellectual disabilities, or individuals with limited dexterity. Number 6, evaluation and feedback. Use accessible surveys, both digital and paper versions. Ask for feedback in multiple ways, such as written forms, verbal input, or visual cues. For example, use a happy or sad face. Ensure questions are culturally appropriate and easy to understand. Benefit: more inclusive data collection and program improvement. In conclusion, many of the examples here were provided as accommodations in Part 1 of this training. The key takeaway is to build in universal design so accommodation requests are more manageable. Here are some considerations when working with the public. We shouldn't tell an individual with a disability what type of accommodations will meet their needs. We need to engage in an interactive process. We don't want to ask invasive questions about the nature of an individual's disability or for private medical information or records. We shouldn't deny a reasonable accommodation request until all possible alternatives have been explored. If we are unable to fulfill the accommodation, we need to document and provide a clear reason for the denial. Don't ask questions about a person's disability unless it is brought up by the individual. We shouldn't be afraid to ask questions when you are unsure of what to do. Lastly, we should make suggestions of alternative accommodations or ask for clarification on an individual's needs. We need to respond to all reasonable accommodation requests in a timely fashion. We should treat accessibility or modification-related requests from those individuals with disabilities as accommodation requests, regardless of whether the words reasonable accommodation are used. We need to do our best to make sure the services are provided in an integrated setting without segregating the individual who made the request. If you offer help, wait until the offer is accepted. We should speak directly to the person and treat adults as adults. Let's review. In Part 2 of this training, we learned, first, each program or activity should have an identified person to fulfill an accommodation request. The individual should be trained on how to document and collaborate in the interactive process. Once solutions have been determined, we need to notify the individual of the final decision. If an accommodation is denied, there need to be clear and concise documentation outlining the justification. Second, there are different techniques to proactively reducing barriers, including the use of universal design. A key benefit to using universal design is to build in access for all, as opposed to providing accommodations through modification. We are still obligated to provide accommodations, but by using universal design, our goal is to reduce the number of accommodation requests. Third, 6 examples of universal design were provided to illustrate different methods in program and service design. Some of the suggestions have an associated cost, but there are many which don't have additional costs. Since we don't always know if an accommodation will be requested, when possible, we should budget or have a plan to fulfill accommodations when asked. Finally, a few considerations were provided to help service providers engage in the interactive process and reduce the anxiety of having conversations around accessibility. I hope you have enjoyed part 2 of this series. Please visit WSU's Extension website for more resources on how to make our Washingtonians and all feel welcomed.